everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is January the 26th, 2023. I'm Barry Stagner. Glad to be back with you this week, and sorry for the kind of disjointed schedule over the past couple of weeks. We weren't able to do anything 2 weeks ago, and then Amir and I did a brief lineup last week, which I hope you guys found encouraging. And this week we're back at it. And first of all, I just have to say thank you to all of you for the many, many prayers. Amir and I have talked multiple times about this particular trip. You know, we have been all over the world, literally together, and seen many things, been to many wonderful places, met just wonderful, awesome, godly Christians all over the world. And but this was just a special trip. I think partially because, you know, we attempted something that, to our knowledge, has never been done before, and that is teach the whole book of Revelation in one day. And we also did a day and a half or a day and a partial conference, taught through the whole book of Revelation in 7 sessions. And then the next weekend, we taught it in 5, and didn't really feel like we missed anything. Felt like we covered all the necessary bases, and it was just a great time. And of course, the people of the Philippines are just amazingly wonderful and kind people. And we just had such a time of fellowship, a time of ministry. And so just thank you for praying. And, you know, I have to say, you know, for the first time I think I've ever gone anywhere, whether it's domestic or international, the flights were pretty much on time. And I had one that was supposed to leave at 12:30 a.m., wound up leaving at 1:30 a.m., but I had an 8-hour layover after that, so it didn't really matter. But yeah, just everything went well. And I mentioned on the little blip I did today that on and off throughout our time in the Philippines, Amir was having stomach trouble, and he almost in landing here in LA, it started in again. So just keep him in prayer that he's good and healthy, just so he's good and healthy, but also so he's able to enjoy the day at the Proximity Conference this Saturday. So again, we still have some room if you'd like to sign up and join us individually, or I should say in person, obviously individually. My brain's still somewhere out over the Pacific, at least part of it. But anyway, you can still sign up at cctustin.org if you'd like to join us in person. And then there'll be multiple platforms via Behold Israel, Calvary Chapel East Anaheim, and Calvary Chapel Tustin. And this YouTube channel and Facebook page, also you'll be able to watch the conference on. So, but I hope those in the local area will come and join us, and just be a great time of fellowship, meeting other believers, and just hanging out for the day and talking about the fact that Jesus is coming again. And as I mentioned, Jan Markell is going to be joining us. She's not quite yet able to travel, and you know, travel is very taxing. And Jan has opted to join us on via satellite, so to speak, or streaming. And so she'll be with us, and we're going to be doing a kind of a roundtable current events type of session. And that will be in the afternoon, and then we'll follow up with our Q&A, and Jan will be with us for both of those. And then, of course, the other 2 speakers are myself and Mir Sarfati, and then Pastor Mike Olay, the other 3 speakers, I should say. Pastor Mike Olay, the operations manager for Behold Israel. Mike is hilarious. Mike is godly. Mike is a great teacher, so I know you'll be blessed by Mike if you've never heard him before. So lots of stories to cover today. We've got a couple of weird ones I'm going to throw out there. Another asteroid story. Actually, by the time you know, we get up tomorrow, it will have already happened. Even if I'm not sure what time it's supposed to pass by, but there's an asteroid going to pass the Earth by 2,200 miles, and that's close. And I'll tell you why that's important when we get to that story. But so buckle up. Here we go. Forbes is reporting that Germany and the U.S. will send battle tanks to the Ukraine in a major policy reversal. And Germany will supply Ukraine with heavy battle tanks and green light plans for its allies to do the same, Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced on Wednesday, while the U.S. will provide Abrams tanks of its own, a U-turning after months of international pressure and marking a major boost of Western military aid to Kiev. The decision was made in close consultation with ally countries, Scholz said, adding that the aim is to quickly establish 2 tank battalions in Ukraine. Germany will train Ukrainian troops to use the tanks and provide a supply package including logistics, ammunition, and system maintenance. The U.S. will also send 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, and Joe Biden announced in a press conference on Wednesday a policy reversal after months of demurring. The German government will also approve requests for other countries wanting to send Ukraine their own Leopard 2 tanks. And this removes a major obstacle for would-be donors as Germany, which makes the Leopard 2 and supplies them under export licenses, has been reluctant to authorize shipments to Ukraine and holds a veto over resale or re-export. And Spain, Poland, and Norway are all reportedly planning to send Kiev some of their Leopard 2 tanks. In a press conference on Wednesday, Biden said Russian President Vladimir Putin wrongly expected the West's commitment to Ukraine to waver over time, adding that the shipment of tanks is meant to help Ukraine defend and protect Ukrainian land and should not at all serve as an offensive threat to Russia. Now, again, you just never know what's going to be the catalyst to light the whole Ezekiel invasion scenario. And, something like this could send Putin over the edge and just begin to move forward with really whatever his ultimate plans are. I know what he has said, but, who knows what's behind it. And we do know that generally, there is a energy-related products motivation behind all of this, as well as, his desire for the glory days of Mother Russia to return. And, we've got several who have that aspiration in our world today in places of power. Of course, we know the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He wants to see, there be a global caliphate with Shia Islam in control. And then, of course, you've got Erdogan, who is the head of mostly Sunni Turkey, who also wants to see the glory days of the Ottoman Empire return. And, all of these things, and especially those three, being part of the Ezekiel war scenario, just tell us that, there's coming a change for sure. And that change is not going to be what some of these people think. There is going to be an invasion of Israel. There are 5 named nations who are going to invade from the north, and that is Russia, Iran, Turkey, Sudan, and Libya. And they are named under their ancient names through geographic locations of the descendants of Noah. In Genesis chapter 10, in the Table of Nations, we find where, many of them settled. And there are others, historians who have helped along with locating what geographic regions of the world are represented there. But we know now that, without question, that these geographic areas now occupied by the modern countries I just named are going to play a role. And 3 of them already have these ideas in their head of the glory days of old and restoring them and bringing honor and sense of power and world domination to their country. Now, interesting story to follow that up. Amir made a rather interesting statement last week when we were on the lineup together, and that is that the U.S. has sent more money to Ukraine in this year or military support to Ukraine and money in this past year than they have to Israel in Israel's 70-some-odd year history. And what an interesting statistic to consider, especially in light of this. The Gateway Pundit says, your tax dollars at work. Ukrainian officials blew $100 billion in U.S. uniparty dollars on sports cars, mansions, luxury vacations, etc. And Ukraine is embroiled in another corruption scandal after several top officials were caught purchasing sports cars, mansions, and luxury vacations as the rest of the country suffered in the war with Russia. This comes the same day that the U.S. and Germany agreed to send the country more tanks, the story we just read. The Ukrainian government on Tuesday confirmed the resignation of multiple high-ranking officials amid large-scale corruption allegations in what's being called the biggest mass resignation and graft scandal since the Russian invasion began. Some dozen officials have quit their posts after a huge political shakeup over allegations and probes into cases ranging from bribery to mismanagement of aid funds for purchasing food, to embezzlement, to driving expensive cars while common people suffer under wartime conditions. A top presidential advisor and 4 deputy ministers among these two defense officials, along with 5 regional governors, were forced out of their posts. Excuse me. And separately, the Defense Ministry had earlier announced the resignation of Deputy Minister Vazislav Shapovalov, who was in charge of the Army's logistical support on the heels of accusations it was signing food contracts at inflated prices. And, we've seen that same kind of thing here in the U.S. We've seen some profit taking in the midst of crisis, and, the government has had to step in to keep prices during a catastrophe low, and rather than like when a hurricane hits, running up the cost of a sheet of plywood, which people would need to board up their windows and all that. But here we have the same kind of thing. People are hungry, and here you've got a government official running up the price of food for people who are desperate for it. So again, we live in corrupt times, and, it reminds me of the fact that Jesus said that we'll be living in days such as Noah's when it's time for him to return. And one of the things that we find in Genesis about Noah's day is that the earth was corrupt. And we're seeing this kind of corruption all over the world and in many ways. And again, here the U.S. is throwing money out there without any way to track it. And we saw that in Iran. And excuse me. And watching this now happen, and just, our money that we actually borrow to give to somebody else that we'll have nothing in return for is now being spent to live lavish lifestyles. And what a messed up world. Aren't you glad the Lord's coming? Well, aren't you glad you know him? And so thankful that he has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Just the News is reporting that the U.S. military would run out. Here's where I wanted to start with those two stories. Would run out of some munitions within a week of conflict with China, a report says. The U.S. military would likely run out of some munitions within a week of the conflict with China in the Taiwan Strait, according to a new report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. These shortfalls would make it extremely difficult for the U.S. to sustain a protracted conflict, and equally concerning, the deficiencies undermine deterrence, states the report released Monday by the Washington, D.C. think tank. The group specifically cites a shortage of long-range precision-guided munitions, and President Joe Biden said in May that the U.S. would intervene militarily if China invades Taiwan. The think tank also found such a limited stockpile of munitions would be compounded by China already having heavily invested in munitions and acquiring high-end weapon systems and equipment 5 to 6 times faster than the United States, according to some U.S. government estimates. Still, the U.S. defense industrial base is overall operating at a level suited for a peaceful environment and is not prepared for the current global situation, the report concluded. The report recommends the United States military reassess munition requirements and replenish what is needed, as well as create a munitions reserve and a sustainable plan to obtain weapons now and in the future. And again, going back to our previous story, we're sending Abrams tanks, and no, it's not a massive number, but we have been sending munitions over, and many are being stored in Israel, as a matter of fact, for potential future conflict. And I just have to wonder, because we have the type of administration that we have, common sense is out the window. You've got an administration that, falls into this whole, who knows what a woman is kind of thing, and the rest of the nonsense that goes along with that. And they're in charge of the munitions stockpile here in the U.S. that is being rapidly depleted. And you have to wonder, what are other countries thinking, like China, like Russia, who constantly build their stock of supplies of munitions and intercontinental ballistic missiles and things of that nature, to watch the U.S. basically cut its own throat militarily, because, all these things represent a potential show of force and power. And here the U.S. has just given their stuff away and depleting our own stockpiles of weapons with which we would be able to defend ourselves. So, and I say this for the reason that, the U.S. is not in Bible prophecy. There's nothing about the United States in the last days. So something's going to happen to the U.S. And could we be so, I'm just going to say it, stupid as to give all of our ammo away and just open the door for a country to invade us and take us over? And of course, I don't mean every bullet or every grenade launcher or every tank or any of that, but could we just put ourselves in a position where we become so vulnerable by not replenishing our supplies? When you've got, especially, administration that's not exactly pro-military, and who knows? We don't know what's going to cause this. And again, I remember I just I kind of went through this when I got back from South Africa some months ago, back in July. You have to bear with me because I don't know why, but the whole jet lag thing just hit me about 10 minutes ago. And so pardon me if I sound a little spaced out tonight, but didn't want to miss after being out for a couple of weeks. But so our next story is interesting, and we've talked about this a little bit last week, and it just reminds us a major curiosity. I've always found this to be a bit bizarre as to why it happened when in 1967 the statement went over the radio that the Temple Mount is in our hands by the soldiers who had captured it. And Times of Israel reports that Itamar Ben-Gvir, vows to keep going up to the Temple Mount. I don't follow Jordanian policy. Now, let me just pause and say this, again, has been a bit of a mystery to me, why Israel bows to these other countries within their own sovereign territory and with the most holy place within Judaism. And they basically let the Muslims run roughshod over them and don't fight for the rights of the Jewish people. The Jewish law says that anybody can go and pray on the Temple Mount, and yet they don't allow the Jews or Christians to do so. You can't even stand in a posture of prayer. You can't stand in a circle as a group like you're praying. Any of those things, or they'll run you off. And, I get, overall the idea that they want to rouse the whole Muslim community against them. But, when you start doing things like forbidding your own people to worship freely and openly, and you protect those who are adversarial to use to do that same thing, there's just something wrong with the thinking there. But a day after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Jordanian King Abdullah II in Amman and discussed maintaining calm on the Temple Mount, far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir vowed to continue visiting the Flashpoint holy site regardless. I manage my own policy concerning the Temple Mount, not that of the Jordanian government, Ben-Gvir told the Khan public broadcaster on Wednesday, noting that he did not know exactly what was discussed in the Amman meeting. With all due respect to Jordan, Israel is an independent country, he said. I went up to the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is the most important place to the Jewish people, and the state of Israel is a sovereign state, an independent state, not under the auspices of any other country. Ben-Gvir said he was not yet certain when he expected to next visit the holy site, but he said that Netanyahu had not tried to stop me from going up to the Temple Mount. Pardon me. According to media reports, Netanyahu promised Abdullah that the status quo on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem will be preserved during their previously unannounced meeting in Jordan on Tuesday. And according to Channel 12 News, Netanyahu made the promise more than once during the hours-long visit, and also gave assurances that Israel would protect the authority of the Islamic Waqf, a Jordanian-appointed council that administers the Temple Mount. The site is the holiest for the Jews as the location of two biblical temples, while the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Mount is the third holiest site in Islam, turning the area into a major flashpoint in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And again, I've mentioned this multiple times over the years because it just has to be said. We have to remember that Jerusalem is mentioned over 800 times in the Bible. It's not mentioned once in the Quran. What the Quran does mention is what's called the faraway mosque. And any Islamic scholar worth his salt, and the Hadith and the Sunnah both say that the faraway mosque is in Saudi Arabia, just like Mecca and Medina. It's not in Jerusalem like so many Muslims like to claim. It's actually, according to Islam, not a holy site at all. And according to Islam, in Surah chapter 5, Jerusalem and the land of Israel belongs to the people of Moses, the people of the book, as they're referred to. And yet this is all overlooked, and this whole claim is made. And so here again, we've got someone who is treating the situation like it ought to be treated, Ben Gvir, and yet he has kicked up a lot of dust just with his appointment to a cabinet post because he is so far right in the minds of the world. He's so far right that he wants to actually treat Israel like it's Israeli sovereign territory. Now, oh my goodness, I am so sorry. I actually have been doing really well as far as the jet lag thing, but for some reason tonight it just seems to be getting the best of me here all of a sudden. Well, the Daily Mail reports that Biden's climate envoy, John Kerry, says an extraterrestrial force brought people to Davos to save the planet in a bizarre World Economic Forum speech. I'm convinced and this is the Great Reset crowd, in case you're wondering, the World Economic Forum. And the other ones, in Klaus Schwab, the president or head of the World Economic Forum, he's the one that made the statement regarding the Great Reset that you will own nothing and be happy. In other words, somebody else is going to have the responsibility for taking care of you. Oh my gosh. Please forgive me. I'm so sorry. And Kerry went on to say, I'm convinced we will get to a low carbon, no carbon economy. We're going to get there because we have to. I am not convinced we're going to get there in time to do what the scientists said, which is avoid the worst consequences of the crisis, he added. You look at what's happening with species. Half the species of the planet have already been killed. Well, that's nonsense. The U.S. climate envoy John Kerry told a group of attendees Tuesday at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, that they were part of a select group of human beings brought together by an extraterrestrial force to save the planet. I'm sorry, what a kook. And the climate czar opened by thanking Borge Brende, president of the World Economic Forum in Geneva, for getting him the best room I've ever had here in 35 years. And Kerry then launched into a diatribe warning attendees that time is running out to avoid climate change's worst consequences. What a contrast. When you stop and think about it, it's pretty extraordinary that we select group of human beings, because of whatever touched us at some point in our lives, are able to sit in a room and come together and actually talk about saving the planet, Kerry mused. Now, all these people flew there in their private jets so they could tell us we need to take the bus. And again, just the ridiculous approach to all these things that we've been seeing of late reminds us that the Lord said he will send a strong delusion in the last days. And these people are just that. They are deluded. And it's almost extraterrestrial to think about saving the planet, Kerry said. And if you say that to most people, they think you're just a crazy tree-hugging and lefty liberal, a do-gooder or whatever. And Kerry delivered this speech at a World Economic Forum session titled Philanthropy, a Catalyst for Protecting Our Planet, and decried that allegedly wise adult human beings still ignored the science, mathematics, and physics of climate change. I'm convinced we will get to a low carbon, no carbon economy. We're going to get there because we have to, he said. Those worst consequences are going to affect millions of people all around the world, in Africa and other places. Of the 20 most affected countries in the world from the climate crisis, 17 are in Africa. My goodness. As to how to get there, he said, the lesson I've learned in the last years, and I learned it as Secretary of State, I've learned it since, reinforced in spades, here's how you get it done. Money, money, this is no exaggeration, this is exactly an exact quote. Money, 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 money. And I'm sorry I have to say that. That's what Kerry said. I'm sorry, I have to report on John Kerry. Kerry said governments would need to ramp up their investments, as would philanthropists, to keep the climate from warming 1.5 degrees centigrade. And again, just, this whole issue and the climate change thing, and I've said before many times, that climate change is real. Its old name is weather. And we've got a story to support that here in a moment, but it's even got an inkling of giving a nod to the whole climate change crisis. And here's an interesting story. I'm sure many of you over the years have heard about a polar axis shift and things cataclysmically taking place. And, scientists all agree that there have been polar axis shifts where the North Pole becomes the South and the South the North. And the argument is over how fast it happens. If it's instantaneous, it would be catastrophic to the surface of the Earth. If it's gradual, as many scientists say, taking over a couple thousand years, then it would be a non-event. But listen to this. I thought this was an interesting story, especially in light of all the climate change cries. According to the Associated French Press, Earth's inner core may have started spinning the other way. Far below our feet, a giant may have started moving against us. Earth's inner core, a hot ball of iron the size of Pluto, has stopped spinning in the same direction as the rest of the planet and might even be rotating the other way, researchers suggested on Monday. Roughly 3,100 miles below the surface we live on, this planet within a planet can spin independently because it floats in the liquid metal outer core. Exactly how the inner core rotates has been a matter of debate between scientists, and the latest research is expected to prove controversial. What is little known is the inner core comes from measuring the tiny differences in seismic waves created by earthquakes or sometimes nuclear explosions as they pass through the middle of the Earth. Seeking to track the inner core's movements, new research published in the journal Nature Geoscience analyzed seismic waves from repeating earthquakes over the last 6 decades. And the study's authors from Peking University said they found that the inner core's rotation came to a near halt around 2009 and then turned in an opposite direction. We believe the inner core rotates relative to the Earth's surface back and forth like a swing, they told the AFP. One cycle of the swing is about 7 decades, meaning it changes roughly every 35 years. They said it previously changed direction in the early 1970s and predicted the next about phase would be in the mid-2040s. The researchers said this rotation roughly lines up with changes in what is called the length of day, small variations in the exact time it takes the Earth to rotate on its axis. So far, there's little to indicate what the inner core does has much effect on surface dwellers, but researchers said they believe there were physical links between all the Earth's layers from the inner core to the surface. We hope our study can motivate some researchers to build and test models which treat the whole Earth as an integrated dynamic system. Well, think about what we're seeing. We're seeing a radical change in anomalies in weather patterns and geological events. And, here now we've got scientists saying, well, the giant iron ball inside the Earth started turning the other way. And some would say this is going to create evidence of it on the surface of the Earth, which could certainly manifest itself because magnetic fields are involved in impacting geological movement. And some seismologists said, it's quite likely that we'll see a change in what happens on the surface of the Earth, the outer crust, in the form of geological events, which, again, could have an impact on astronomical events or atmospheric events, I should say, and weird weather happening. Now, here's a story I mentioned at the outset, our asteroid story for the week. Asteroid 23BU to whiz past Earth in one of the closest ever approaches. That's why I wanted to throw this story in here. The small asteroid will make one of the closest approaches on record, NASA scientists predict, but it poses no danger. An asteroid the size of a large truck will fly by Earth on Thursday, just 2,200 miles above the planet's surface, and one of the closest approaches ever recorded. That's why I wanted to cover this story. The asteroid named 2023BU, remember when they put that number on there, that's the year it was seen or discovered, will travel over the Pacific Ocean west of southern Chile Thursday afternoon Pacific time, according to David Farnokia, a navigation engineer at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The near-Earth object poses no danger, and there is no expected impact. It's not going to break up, said Dr. Farnokia. It's going to zoom past the Earth, say hello, and move on. Had it entered Earth's orbit, the asteroid would have burned up on entry, and its small size turned into a fireball. And it's not going to get close enough for that, Dr. Finocchia went on to say. Now, here's why I wanted to cover this story. It sounds like a non-event, but this will be the fourth closest approach recorded, according to Dr. Finocchia. He said there were two instances in 2020 and another in 2021. That's recent history, and it falls right in line with what Jesus said about things ramping up in a birth pang-like progression, including these type of events. The word seismos, translated as earthquake in Matthew 24:3-8, also means a gale or a tempest or an atmospheric type event. And we're seeing everything on unprecedented scales, and the largest that, the 500-year floods, 1,000-year drought, all these other things. And yet here we are also seeing another thing that I think is interesting as it relates to the fact that it's kind of a warning shot. We know during the tribulation, there's going to be a great mountain burning with fire thrown into the ocean. It doesn't fall into the ocean like a volcano on the shore. It doesn't come from the ocean floor like an oceanic underwater volcano, but it's thrown from outside of our atmosphere into the sea. Now, this is an asteroid. I feel confident in saying that during the tribulation, there's going to be an asteroid strike and a comet strike on the Earth. And there's physical reasons why we could say that and understand that. But this will be the fourth closest approach ever recorded, and two in 2020 and another in 2021. And now you've got one in 2023 rounding out the top four near-Earth approaches of a foreign body. And interesting to consider the fact that in every other area, we are seeing warning signs. The increase of wars and rumors of wars, the rise in ethnic tensions, talk about, famine and inflation and all those things that we'll see, or I should say the world will see, under the riders of the four horses of the apocalypse. But we're seeing precursors to these things now. And could it be, with the four closest known passages to Earth of asteroids all happening in the last 3 years, that this too should tell us that rogue asteroid that's going to strike the Earth and bring about catastrophic consequences could be lurking out there and just unknown. Well, I believe it is lurking out there, but who knows when it's going to be seen or spotted. More observations were reported to the Minor Planet Center, a clearinghouse for the position measurement of small celestial bodies. And after the discovery was announced, observatories around the globe added to the findings, helping astronomers refine 2023 BU's orbit, according to NASA. And NASA's Impact Hazard Assessment System, which is based in Southern California and called SCOUT, analyzed the data and quickly predicted a near miss. Now, again, just thinking about all that we've talked about over the months and years about the fact that, this mountain burning with fire clearly something of solid mass. It's not like gas and ice, like a comet, and it strikes the Earth and destroys a third of the ships in the sea. And, this is just a reminder that we are seeing the same pattern, even with asteroids. The closest passes to Earth have all happened in the last 3 years. Really surprising to hear a report like this coming out of the LA Times, which is, totally a liberal newspaper. But for all their ferocity, their headline reads, California storms were not likely caused by global warming, experts say. As California emerges from a 2-week bout of deadly atmospheric rivers, a number of climate researchers say the recent storms appear to be typical of the intense periodic rains the state has experienced throughout its history and not the result of global warming. Although scientists are still studying the size and severity of the storms that killed 19 people and caused up to $1 billion in damage, initial assessment suggests the destruction had more to do with California's historic, catch that phrase, drought to deluge cycles, mountainous topography, and aging flood infrastructure than it did with climate-altering greenhouse gases. Although the media and some officials were quick to link a series of powerful storms to climate change Researchers interviewed by the LA Times said they had yet to see evidence of that connection. Instead, the unexpected onslaught of rain and snow after 3 years of punishing drought appears to be akin to other major storms that have struck California every decade or more since experts began keeping records in the 1800s. In other words, this pattern of drought and heavy rain has been going on since the 1800s. Tuck that away in your mind. And we know from climate models that global warming will boost California storms in the future. How do you know that? They don't know that. But we haven't made that connection with the latest storm, said Alexander Grushinov, a climate scientist at Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Assuming that these storms were driven by global warming would be like assuming an athlete who broke a record was on steroids. Mike Anderson, official state climatologist for California, suggested that the recent series of atmospheric rivers and long plumes of vapor that can pour over the West was a grim reminder that in a place so dry, sudden flooding can bring catastrophe. Each of the recent atmospheric rivers were within the historical distribution of sizes of atmospheric rivers, Anderson said, and it will take further study to determine how warming temperatures influence the sequence or the sudden transition from dry to wet, soon back to dry. And news and social media images of the storms were harrowing. Massive ocean waves demolished seawalls on a pier. Hurricane-force winds uprooted trees and crushed and killed bystanders. Breached levees flooded the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta River region, drowning motorists. The parade of storms also dumped desperately needed snow in the Sierra Nevada range, nearly 250% of average for that time of year. It also recharged giant reservoirs that had dwindled to weedy channels. In one instance, Lake Cachuma, about 15 miles northwest of Santa Barbara, rose from 36% capacity to nearly 80% capacity in just one day. But in a region whose water supply has been severely depleted by more than 2 decades of mega drought, stoked by climate change, of course, researchers suggested that some observers were too quick to reach for superlatives. A group I call the mediaologists always hyped the current situation to make it seem worse than the last one, Grushinov said, using a pithy play on the word meteorologist. Although scientists still can't say whether recent storms rank among other epic downpours, they did say they did not appear to be one of a kind. So, again, listen to the article and the things that are said in there, how many times they want to force climate change in there. And yet they open the article by saying this is normal and we've been tracking it for over 200 years. But because this isn't unusual, because the storm levels weren't unusual, because the drought deluge pattern is not unusual, this was just weather. And yet they have to sell the climate change agenda because there are other purposes behind it. But, we're thanking the Lord for the rain here. We got more rain coming next week. And I'm glad we've had some blue skies and sunshine to enjoy for the past week. And I think Sunday, Monday, we got rain coming again. Christian Headlines reports King David's name uncovered in 2,900-year-old stone slab. A 2,900-year-old basalt stone slab contains an extra biblical reference to King David in support of him being an actual historical figure, according to scholars writing in the latest edition of Biblical Archeological News. The research involved an examination of the so-called Mesha stone, or Moabite stone, or steel, or Moabite stone, which was discovered in 1868 before being damaged in 1869. Although the damage made certain parts of the tablet unreadable, a page squeeze, papier-mâché impression, of the tablet, which was made before the damage, allowing the original words to be deciphered according to Biblical Archaeology Society. The slab was dated to the 9th century BC and chronicles the victories of King Mesha of Moab. It possibly references the events of 2 Kings 3, in which Moab goes to war against Israel and Judah. And in 2015, a team from a West Semitic research project of the University of Southern California took new digital photographs of the restored stela and the paper squeeze. And the team used a method called reflectance transformation imaging, in which numerous digital images are taken from an artifact or of an artifact from different angles and then combined to create a precise three-dimensional digital rendering of the piece. And that's what allowed them to read King David's name. And the reference to the house of David as Judah's rulers seems to support King David as a historical figure, a summary of the research says. Again, this is one of the main attacks against the Bible, is that all of these characters, King David, Solomon, his son, and others, Abraham even, are just fictitious characters where there's no historical evidence to support it. Even though the Bible has a massive amount of history in it, they don't accept that. But now here you've got a secular platform that is announcing that they have seen and found writings that include non-biblical writings that include the house of King David of Judah. Now, here's a pair of stories that I want to line together coming from the Christian headlines. And the headline reads, "The U.S. is the most permissive country when it comes to transgender treatments, the study shows. According to a new study, the U.S. displays further tolerance for transgender treatments than Europe. And the group Do No Harm, which published a study, found that the United States is the most permissive country when it comes to legal and medical gender transition of children. During an interview with Fox News, Dr. William Malone, a board-certified endocrinologist, said that doctors who find the procedures risky fear scrutiny from politicians and reputable medical associations. We're dealing with what may be the biggest medical and ethical scandal of modern times," he told Fox News. "Transgender medicine is big business, and youth who are transitioning today will be medical patients for life for the next 60 plus years. Mental health among youth is at an all-time low, making them particularly vulnerable to the solutions that suggest an easy fix." Malone also contended that the approach the Biden administration is taking on transgender medicine does not make sense. He added that certain treatments should not be allowed until it is proven that they do more good than harm. "We've jumped to hormones and surgery, bypassing the most obvious alternative, therapy," Malone said. "We need to take a step back and study these various interventions before we can determine the best way forward. This is just what Sweden, Finland, and England have done, and we hope the U.S. will follow suit." So the United States is basically leading the charge in mutilating children who, say, "Well, I'm a boy when I'm a biological girl," or vice versa. And, we've talked earlier about the fact that, all kids think they're something else. How many have seen themselves to be a fireman, or how many little girls saw themselves to be a princess or a mermaid? And that doesn't mean that we make efforts to turn them into those things. It just means that they're kids with an imagination. And, there's a process that includes something called puberty that allows a child to transition from early life into adulthood, and all the necessary components for reproductive activity then come into play. So if that hasn't happened when you're 5, how can you know what it is that you are? At least feeling. You don't have any sex drive at 5 years old or 6 years old. And it's just shameful what is happening to children around the world. And it's even worse that the U.S. is driving the bus on that. Now, here's a counter story to that. And it comes, as I said, from the Christian headlines. Man is allegedly told to leave the Mall of America for wearing "Jesus is the only way" on his shirt. A video has gone viral showing security guards at the Mall of America telling a man wearing a shirt that says "Jesus is the only way" to remove his t-shirt or leave the mall. According to churchleaders.com, in the video, a security guard at the Minnesota Mall tells the man that people are offended by his shirt and he must remove it or leave. Jesus is associated with religion and is offending people, the male security guard said at the beginning of one of the videos. "It's not religion, it's about eternal life," the man wearing the shirt said. "Okay, but it's the same thing," says the guard. "People have been offended." The man says he didn't say anything, but the guard again told him remove the shirt or leaving are your only options right now. "Why don't you just take it off and shop, man?" the security guard says in another posted video of the incident. "That's all we want." "I'm just wearing my t-shirt," the man later tells a police officer. "I'm not preaching. I came here to shop." The Mall of America's website about security says that inappropriate attire includes apparel that has obscene language, obscene gestures, or racial, religious, ethnic slurs that are likely to create a disturbance. Now, you have to remember there's a major Muslim population in Minnesota where the Mall of America is. So, again, shut the Christian down, shut the Christian up. We don't want to offend those who would like to see our nation under Sharia law. Now, another story coming out of Washington, the Jewish news syndicate reports that Rashida Tlaib erected a Palestinian flag in her Capitol Hill office and accuses Israel of apartheid. The move was an apparent response to Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's crackdown on the celebration of terrorism by Arab Israelis. Palestinians may be banned from flying their flag under an apartheid government, but we can still proudly do it at my office. I'm proud to be a Palestinian American, and I want the Palestinian people to know that not all Americans support apartheid. No one can erase our existence, wrote Tlaib. The post was an apparent response to Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's crackdown on the celebration and promotion of terrorism by Arab Israelis. Ben-Gvir earlier this month directed police to enforce a ban on flying of Palestinian flags in solidarity with terrorist groups. We will fight terrorism and the encouragement of terrorism with all of our might, he said. And despite Tlaib's claim, flying the PLO flag in public is not a criminal offense in Israel. However, police have the authority to take them down if they are displayed in solidarity with or sympathy for a terror group, or if there's a high probability that leaving the flag up will result in a public disturbance. In September, Tlaib stated in an interview with Al Jazeera Network that she does not see how a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can work. She further claimed that Israel has an apartheid system and the U.S. policies toward Israel must change. And again, just why? Well, I do know why people like this get elected. But, this is the United States. And, this is where I think there's been so many issues that have been brought in, from a change in just a single generation, where people used to arrive from Europe and all over the world at Ellis Island and bend down and kiss the ground. And we're so excited about not becoming a European American, not becoming a Romanian American, not becoming an Italian American, not becoming a Greek American, but a American. And now, here you've got all this talk of combining races, and they're flying a Palestinian flag in the U.S. Capitol building is just beyond bizarre to me. But that's the world we live in. Well, that's it for tonight, and please forgive me for yawning and all the other things. Like I said, I've been doing great. I've been staying up, up until a good, decent time to go to bed, and sleeping pretty much all night, on and off. And somehow today, the jet lag caught up with me, so my apologies for that. But please pray for proximity. Please attend. If you live in the area, it'd be great to see you. And that's one of our Amir and I's favorite parts about doing these conferences is we get to meet people instead of like this, where you're looking at a screen and I'm talking to one, or basically talking to a camera. Be great to see you there. And Saturday, the January 28th, from 9 to 5 p.m. And you can register at cctustin.org, or you can watch on Facebook or YouTube via the Behold Israel or my personal pages with my name. So with that, that's it. And again, thanks for putting up with my yawns and all that. But hopefully tomorrow, I got 2 more days to be fully intact. I can't afford to be doing this at the Proximity Conference. So your prayers, again, I'm grateful for them and covet them going forward, that I be on the right clock real fast and be ready to go for Saturday. Well, that's it for me, and we'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless you.